everyone, welcome back to News Now Nexus. If you're new here, I'm Emmanuel Bassi, and this channel is all about breaking news. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss out on our exciting new content. Let us dive into today's breaking news. We can no longer continue to give billions of dollars to France. That has got to stop. Dr. Arikana Chihombori-Quao.
Go to Nigeria. I'm not so sure about Kenya, but again, you need a visa. And you can just go. If you're from another country, you can actually just apply for what they call a Schengen visa. A Schengen visa allows you to travel throughout Europe. One visa will allow you to travel throughout Europe. Set up back in 1884. However, we as African leaders now are beginning to realize that we need to do something about this. So a lot of them now, within Africa, we have what we're calling visa on arrival, where you show up at the borders and you can apply for a visa and you get it. But not all countries are doing visa on arrival. So you have to check the website of every country to see what, for your particular passport, what are the visa requirements.
This is, go to my, actually it went away. I'm trying to pull this map up, please. So this is a map of Africa before the Berlin Conference.
Correct. So what we were prior to the Berlin Conference, we were massive, powerful kingdoms. Kingdoms with well-established religious and educational systems. Kingdoms that preceded the Greek civilization, the Roman Empire. If the truth be told, civilization began in Africa. Have you ever wondered why? When they talk about Greek philosophers, the mathematicians, they were sent to Egypt for training, to Egypt for advancement. It's because Africa already had it. The pyramids, the Zimbabwe ruins, they were there over 2,500 years before the Greek civilization, 2,500 years before the Roman Empire. It all started in Africa. That's part of the history that was cut out, and they set out to get us to forget that life as we know it began in Africa. Civilization as we know it began in Africa. The Europeans stole it from us. African Union is the membership of all the 55 African heads of states. The African Union Commission is the working organ of the African Union. So the African Union has a president who's always another head of state, and that membership is for 1 year. The working organ of the African Union is the African Union Commission, and it also has a chairperson. That term is 4 years, and that's who Chairman Musa Faki Mahamat is.
Jason.
Well, it's like when you go to the Caribbean. You can even go to St. Martin. You have one part which is Dutch and the other part which is French. They just chopped up these islands and these countries arbitrarily. It depends on who wanted what. You take, for example, part of the Kilimanjaro was supposed to all be in Tanzania, but I think it was one of the queens, the English queens, was visiting, and the story goes that the granddaughter says, "Oh, but grandma, I like that mountain," and so the grandma just said, "Okay, no problem, let's just move the border a little bit into Tanzania so my granddaughter can have part of Mount Kilimanjaro." It was so very random, depending on who felt what. You look at how the DRC dips into Zambia in a very funny way. It's because Leopold decided he wanted a little bit more of the copper in Zambia, so he just carved it out the way he wanted it. It was all very arbitrary, and if you had a voice and the ability to do so and say, "This is what I want," okay, no problem, we put the border here. Wow. Well, let me say, over the years, we have had some heads of states who have tried to pull out of the pact for the continuation of colonization. Sadly, there were coups in those countries, and they found their heads, simply put, on the chopping block. They were assassinated. So the realities and the fear that countries might have are real because of the consequences from France should they decide to pull out. So there really hasn't been. Lately, we heard about the Vice Prime Minister of Italy. They were sick and tired of the young African youth crossing the Mediterranean and ending up on the southern borders. And so they challenged France and said, "Listen, next time we receive these refugees, we are going to bring them to France because you are the one who's taking all those funds out of Africa. That's why African economies cannot develop themselves, because of what France is doing in Africa. So, but there hasn't been a coordinated effort to really say, France, enough is enough. You have got to stop this. And I think, as a black woman, as a mother, I'm at a point where I've had enough. And something needs to be done. If the entire continent could come together. But our reality is, because of the stronghold that France has on Africa, France can destabilize any of its former colonies with the push of a button. So the reality is, trying to push back against France is mission impossible at this time, which is why we are very pleased that finally the African heads of states were able to come together and agreed on what we are calling the African Continental Free Trade Area. You got to understand, back in 1963, when our Pan-African leaders came together and created the Organization of African Unity, they were trying to undo the damage done by the Berlin Conference. But unfortunately, when they went to Addis Ababa, they were divided. We had the Casablanca group, who were Ghana, Guinea, Mali, Egypt, Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia. They were outnumbered by the others, who were the nationalists, who said, let's go slow. The Casablanca group, who said, Africa for the Africans, at home and abroad, African Union now. Had we won, had the Casablanca group won in 1963, Africa would be in a very different place, because all these borders would have been eliminated back then. They came up with a compromise, which we are calling Organization of African Unity. Year in, year out, for 55 years. The African heads of states met. The issue of an Africa speaking with one voice, one continent, one Africa was tabled. And year in and year out, we failed to reach consensus until last year, March 2018, when they finally agreed that enough is enough. Africa must speak with one voice. Africa must enter the world stage as one customs union, as one continent, speaking with one voice. That is the only way that Africa can begin to take her rightful place on the world stage. So it's been a lengthy process, thanks to the legacy of colonization. It seems to me that this should have been a slam dunk. It's common sense. But because of interferences from former colonizers that just kept getting in the way. You look, for example, now West Africa is trying to have the West African echo and have one currency for West Africa. Even that process, it has taken decades because they keep getting interference from outside. So yes, efforts have been made, but not in a coordinated way because of influences and interruptions, interference from the outside.
Ambassador?
France was mostly involved in coups that took place in its former colonies. We've had a total of 67 coups on the continent, and 26 countries were involved. And of the 26 countries, 16 countries were former French colonies.
Hey, I just want
African Americans to understand their history, to understand that what goes on in Africa is your problem, you must own it. As a person of African descent, Africa is home, Africa is your anchor, and that you need to realize that until you fill that void, the average African American, if not all African Americans, whether they realize it or not, there is a void from not knowing where you come from. And that void has got to be filled in. It is a void that is very in the subconscious, deep in your subconscious. First, you must realize that void is there. African Americans and descendants of former slaves around the globe, they are the only ones who struggle with the issue of where do I come from. I had a conversation with one of my girlfriends, an African American, about 7 years ago. And I honestly can't believe that in my old age and all these years that I've lived in this country, it had never occurred to me that the issue of where do I come from is an issue. Because I've never had to ask myself that. Until one day I'm having a conversation with her, and she just looked me straight in the face and says, you know, those of you from the continent, you never have to deal with the issues that we deal with as African Americans. The simple issue of where do I come from? And for a split second, I stopped and I put myself in her position to say, I wonder what it feels like to not know where you came from. I had this overwhelming sadness, and I quickly snapped myself out of it. Now, can you imagine living in that sadness of just not knowing where you come from? Can you imagine? And since then, I have been looking for it when I interact with my African-American friends. I remember one time we had an event, and this top executive was one of the speakers, but she spoke after me, and I talked about this void and the need to an experience she had while just on a retreat with co-workers. And everybody was talking about where they come from. I'm German American, I'm Irish American. And as they were getting closer to her, it dawned on her that she didn't know where she came from, and she didn't know what she was going to say. And right there on the stage, she broke down. I mean, she could not stop sobbing. I had to go on the stage to hug her because she said, I didn't come here to break down. She never realized that there was this void that was so painful. But because of the environment we were in, she was able to go there. And once she got there, her feelings, she was able to express her feelings. So I want the African Americans to know that Africa is home, that what is going on in Africa is your problems, and you must get involved. Until you reconnect with your anchor, which is Africa, you'll always be like a palm tree. When the wind blows this way, here we go. When the wind blows that way, here we go. Africa is home. Accept it. It is who you are. Your DNA is the DNA of an African. Your DNA is the DNA of originality. You are the origin of humanity, and Africa is home. Reconnect. The African heads of states, they agreed on a decision this year which they called ARA 400. ARA standing for return, 400 standing for the 400 years. They declared once and for all that descendants of former slaves, Africa is their home, and that you must come home. Understand that you are welcome, and don't let anyone make you believe that your suffering was worse than those who stayed on the continent. Do you believe seriously that where they took your forefathers, they left a bed of roses? They left a land of milk and honey? The answer is no. Look at what Leopold did in the Congo. Over 75% of the population was killed. Look at what the British did to the Kikuyu. Look at what the Germans did in Namibia. The carnage continued. And to this day, actually, the carnage in Africa continues. The colonizers have never left Africa. They must get out of Africa. Whatever it takes to get the colonizers to treat Africa fairly, we are simply asking what anybody else on earth would be asking for, to be treated fairly and for them to do the right thing. We'll continue with the movement. I think we, people of African descent, must understand that Africa is home. But on my priority is to see to it that France abolishes the Pact for the Continuation of Colonization. We, the poor African countries, can no longer continue to give billions of dollars to France. That has got to stop. And if it is the last thing that I do before I die, I will stay on it until it's done.
That wraps up today's video, folks. I hope you enjoyed it and found it entertaining, informative, helpful. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and drop your thoughts in the comments below. I really love to hear from you. Don't forget to share this video with your friends and join our community by hitting that subscribe button. Until next time, this is Emmanuel Bassi from News Now Nexus, signing off. Stay positive, curious, adventurous, etc., and see you in the next video. God bless.